On behalf of the Chief Executive Officer of the City of Canning, Lynn Russell, and the Mayor, Mr Paul Ng, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the second in the series of the Canning Business Networking events. My name is Mark Holdsworth. I'm the Manager of Economic Development here at the City. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to the Mayor of the City of Canning, Mr Paul Ng.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Welcome to the City of Canning. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional owners of this land on which we are meeting today, and to pay my respect to their elders, both past and present. I would like to specially welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Bernard Saw, and our councillors of the City of Canning, and our Chief Executive Officer, Mrs. Lynn Russell, PSM, and all the directors. And I also acknowledge that the CEO of Victoria Park is also here. I am pleased to welcome each one of you to the second Canning Business Networking event. The City of Canning is placing a high priority on engaging our business community. Our new Economic Development Directorate has a focus on engagement and creating opportunities to support businesses in Canning. It is not only important that we can provide a forum for council to meet with businesses, but for Canning businesses to meet and to network with each other. As part of our commitment to businesses in Canning, the City has launched the Business Advisory Group. The main objective being to provide a reference point to focus on areas of economic development strategy, ensure that this key sector of the community is provided with an appropriate communication mechanism to the City, provide strategic advice to the City, and in turn counsel on issues that affects the business community in Canning, and to raise the profile of the business community in council activities and planning. I encourage you to nominate to be part of the Business Advisory Group. Please see all the information in your gift bag. Please note, the application closed on Tuesday, the 12th of April. In closing, I would sincerely like to thank our principal partner, the Telstra Business Centre, Belmont, for their support in our first session of business event. They are here today and have information specifically for the businesses about NBN and how you can benefit from this new technology. Please take a moment to speak with them as the NBN will be rolling out around the City of Canning very soon. Thank you and enjoy this event.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just to reiterate, for those of you who have considered nominating for the Canning Business Advisory Group, there are nominations inside your gift bags, and the closing date is next Tuesday, the 12th of April. I'm pleased to be able to say that our principal sponsor for this series of business events, Telstra Business, have again provided an iPad mini as their business card draw. There was I think it was a red bowl that was at the entrance when you arrived. If you haven't yet placed your business card in that. That will be circulating soon, and you'll have another opportunity to do that. So we'll draw the winner of that at around about 4:30. Can I just advise that you need to be in the room to take away that iPad if you are the successful owner of the business card that's drawn out. So at this point it's probably appropriate that I introduce our guest speaker, whose reputation probably exceeds the few humble words that I could put forward. But he's widely regarded as one of Australia's leading social commentators by business, the social media and by the broader community. Bernard Salt's regarded as a futurist who uses demographic and social change to interpret how society and how business evolves. So if you've ever sat through his presentations, you'll know that they're always really energetic, they're always a little bit edgy, and they're guaranteed also to raise a smile or a laugh. Despite the humour though, his observations are always really insightful, and I'm sure that his observations that he gives us today as he speaks on innovation and the ageing of our community impact and the impact on business will raise some thoughts and questions for all of us. Please join me in welcoming Bernard Salt to the City of Canning this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark, for that introduction. Thank you also to the City of Canning for the invitation to speak. Bernard Salt, I'm a partner with KPMG based in Melbourne. My presentation today has the grand title of Developing a Culture of Innovation and Enterprise. I want to take a big picture perspective of Perth, of Australia, of Canning, and identify what I think are the key drivers, the key issues, the key opportunities in this region, in this city going forward. I want to start by taking a big picture perspective. I speak around Australia quite frequently, and this next slide is the most contentious and hotly discussed slide at the board level in Australia and New Zealand at the moment. And there is something that should leap off the page at you. And what it is, it speaks to Australian society, I think, and our values. And what I want to start with is a list of the top 10 companies in America. And here they are. In fact, I'm sorry about the slide spilling over a little bit, but these are the top 10 companies in America as measured by market capitalisation. So it's the number of shares multiplied by the share price. If you want to buy Apple as a business, you need $522 billion. You need half the Australian GDP for 12 months to buy Apple, in fact. Then you have Google, then you have Microsoft, then you have Mobil, the oil company, Facebook, Berkshire Hathaway, of course, Amazon, Johnson & Johnson, General Electric, and the bankers, Wells Fargo. And I have also put in the year in which each of these companies was created. And there should be something in this list that leaps off the page at you. And the thing that leaps off the page at anyone in a senior position in business is about 4 or 5 of these were created in the last generation, one in fact in the last 10 years. Now we are an innovative, creative, enterprising people, aren't we? The Prime Minister tells us about our agility, our innovative culture, our ability to invent concepts and so forth. Let's compare ourselves with the Americans. What are the top 10 Australian businesses and how do they compare with the Americans? And here they are. Now Australia is 1/10 the size of America. So the size of our businesses is going to be barely 1/10, if you like, of the Americans. And so BHP Billiton, $110 billion in value if you want to buy the BHP, then CBA, Westpac, NAB, ANZ, Telstra, CSL, Commonwealth Serum Laboratories, Pharmaceuticals, if you like, Wesfarmers, Perth's own, Woolies, of course, and the Macquarie Group. Macquarie Group has only just snuck in there. In fact, in a previous iteration, it was effectively Woolies and Up. And the point there is, if you exclude Macquarie Bank, the most recently created big business on the Australian continent was formed in 1924. The Americans have created Facebook worth $300 billion 10 years ago, let alone Google, let alone Microsoft, let alone Apple, let alone Amazon, let alone Airbnb, let alone Uber. All of those, which country walks the talk in terms of innovation? and which country presents as being rather flat-footed, a bit colonial, a bit outdated, a bit on the edge of the planet. Great at talking the talk, but you Australians do not have the runs on the board. Here is the results of that comparison. And I think it goes to the heart of Australian culture around innovation. We are suspicious of success, the tall poppy syndrome. Go to America, and a lot of things wrong with America, of course, but they emulate and admire and support success. I think we need a cultural shift in the Australian continent and nation around supporting business and enterprise. I would like to see somewhere like the City of Canning create a festival of creative thinking, a festival of enterprise. What are the best businesses that have been created in the City of Canning over the last 12 months? Wherever I go in Australian business, it could be Wagga, it could be Longreach, it could be Merredin, as I've been to, and the first thing they'll talk about is so-and-so as a footballer or a cricketer used to live here. It's a point of pride. Well, that's terrific. Why not showcase business success? Here is a 28-year-old who started a business 2 years ago and that now employs 3 apprentices. I would rather see that community, that local community, showcase and highlight and admire a local enterprise business. And I think that enterprise energy is probably in this room at the moment. And I think as a nation, as a people, we should be starting to celebrate. The days of a Japanese car maker or a German car maker or a British company coming to Australia and employing the Australian people are over. We need to create our own businesses of the future. The Australian Prime Minister understands that. How are we going to create the businesses of the future unless we do more than talk the talk of innovation? We should see a top 10 business there that is created in the 21st century. The best we've got is about 45 years old, and the one prior to that is almost 100 years old, in fact. So very different. The other point you'd say, well, you know, I get services and mining. You know, we're a mining country. We should have 1 or 2 right at the very top. And in fact, we're good at agribusiness, aren't we? In fact, when you do the top 10 list for New Zealand, the #1 company in New Zealand is Fonterra. It's dairying. The New Zealanders can do this, but we did not. We lost an opportunity with, say, Elders, or the equivalent thereof, to create an agribusiness coming out of wheat, coming out of rice, coming out of livestock, coming out of cotton, that then went global. If there is one nation on earth that should be able to produce a world-class agribusiness enterprise, as we do with mining, then it should be Australia. The New Zealanders can do it, we should be able to do it as well. An observation about Australian culture. Let's bring it back to Australia. What is unique about Australia? What is unique about Canning? This is a chart. You do get access to the slides. I'm very happy for them to be made available to anyone at the end of the presentation. Here are a number of global cities, and the numbers reflect the proportion of the local population that was born outside that country. So go to Perth, 41% of Perth's 2 million people born outside Perth, or outside Australia, in fact. They're migrants. So 2 million people, 41%, that's what, it's probably 820,000 Perth people were born outside Australia. Go to New York, it's a global city, an international city, it is 29%. Go to London, it is 36%. Go to Berlin, and it is 13%. Go to Paris, it is 22%. Which is the more internationally connected city? By this measure, Australia. By this measure, Perth, 41% of the population was born overseas. In Canning, that proportion is 50% of the population was born overseas. And in fact, the only cities that come near it, Miami at 39%, Toronto at 49%, but they're all Americans, just across the border. It's a little different sort of getting on a boat and coming to Australia. Auckland's at 39%, Tokyo, the biggest city on earth, 38 million people, 2%. These are very inward-looking cities. Paris is actually an inward-looking city, 22%. London is an inward-looking city compared to the Australians. And then there is the observation that we are a racist nation. Well, how can you have 41% of a major city being born overseas and still be claimed to be racist? We are the most inclusive, welcoming, engaging people for this reason. And I suspect that it's because we've had easy prosperity. It might be different at a time when the prosperity is more difficult to come across. But again, it makes us... You can go to a place like a town in the Western District of Victoria called Horsham. 15,000 people right in the middle of the Wimmera wheat belt, not unlike Merredin, for example. You think that's probably the most white-bread community ever. 10% of Horsham's population was born overseas. Go to Pittsburgh, and it's 4%. We are different. We are unique. We Australians and the New Zealanders are set apart by the extent to which we are eclectic in our demographics. There was a time when we might have been remote, isolated, British, if you like. We are the most cosmopolitan people in cosmopolitan cities with cosmopolitan values and behaviours and aspirations by any measure. Show me a city that offers more than, say, Perth or Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane or Auckland, for that matter. These, of course, refer to, this is a discussion that refers to the great ethnic tribes of Australia, the Greeks, the Italians, the Chinese, the Indians. You can't be in the business of demographics and not have cool acronyms for the different tribes, like yuppies and dinks. Here's some of the coolest acronyms for the latest tribes of Australia. The first one are the pumpkins, P-U-M-C-I-N-S, and I suspect that everyone here is a bit of a pumpkin. Stands for the professional urban middle class in nice suburbs. You can tell pumpkin men on a weekend they wear polo shirts, chinos and boat shoes. And you can tell pumpkin women they wear their active wear absolutely everywhere. And of course you can tell if you come from a pumpkin household if there's goat's cheese in the fridge. I have this theory that households that eat goat's cheese do not eat McDonald's. They are mutually repellent. Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, and to a lesser extent Perth, have what is known as a goat's cheese curtain. It's about 5 kilometres out from the CBD and either inside or outside the goat's cheese curtain. I actually think that the goat's cheese curtain in Perth sweeps around probably East Perth, right through Perth, right through Kings Park, Mount Lawley perhaps, Subiaco, down to Claremont and down to Cottesloe. So it's a goat's cheese sausage, I think, that applies in Perth. Then you have, this is the Nettles. This is the young power couple, 35 to 45, kids under the age of 15, both partners working, household income of more than $150,000 per year. Nettle stands for not enough time to enjoy life. And you can tell if you come from a Nettle household if after the evening meal you and your partner get out your iPhone and coordinate the next day's activities. And if you email the schedule to your nanny, then you're an Uber Nettle. I have actually seen that done. Of course, we make these terms up. My PA came up with the term Nettle. I wanted a term to describe that particular lifestyle. So I ran the column in The Australian. I think they put it on page 3 on that day with a big picture story. 2 days later, it popped up in the New York Times New Word Dictionary. So you really know you've made it when you've invented a new word. Then, of course, you have my personal favourite, the Kippers. These are the young 20-somethings that live at home with their 50-something mum and dad, K-I-P-P-E-R-S, kids in parents' pockets, eroding retirement savings. I have a couple of Kippers myself. Then, of course, everyone knows some Lombards, L-O-M-B-A-R-D-S. Lots of money, but a real dickhead. Actually, you won't find that in the census. But again, the great tribes of Australia. Let's have a look at Perth, and one of its great assets, of course, is the airport, not technically in the city of Canning, but having a major impact on the city of Canning. From Perth, you can actually get to almost 20 international cities. The most international airport on the Australian continent, of course, is Sydney. You can get to 47. Auckland, you can get to 37. Heathrow, you can get to 174, which is a global city. So we might have the ethnic diversity, if you like, but simply because of our geography. The other point when you look at this is, well, you know, this is an Indian Ocean perspective. That's your field of play, if you like. I actually think there is a role for Perth to play in the greater militarisation of this region. If you look at where the Americans are, they're over here in Diego Garcia. They've got a base right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. They've got another one up here in Guam, another one here just south of Tokyo called Okinawa. And the reason why they're there is to actually watch the Chinese, I imagine. But I think Okinawa is looking a bit shaky. So what do the Americans want? This is an area of greater militarisation, rising superpower. So what would the Americans do? They'd want a base, safe, secure, sovereignly friendly nation for 100 years. 2012, Obama pops up in Darwin. Darwin? Obama? Of course, he set up a military base, rotating Marines, 2,500 Marines. And this will be a base for the Americans to monitor. And that's good for Darwin. I actually think that what we will see is a military base, a naval base, down here beefed up at Cockburn Sound. The greater militarisation of China and also the protection of the Northwest Shelf. The Gorgon Gas Project is valued at $50 billion. We do not have any military anywhere along that coast. When the Victorians started to drill for Bass Strait oil in 1968, the RAAF moved from Laverton on the edge of Melbourne to Sale. You put your military where your assets and your risk are. You've got $50 billion sitting off there, we ain't got nothing. I think we need not just the Americans there, the Australians there, the Americans here, and to protect the Northwest Shelf. I don't think that this is an issue of actually having to fight. We are speaking to the region. We're putting our money where our mouth is. Don't even think about it. That's the way you do it. And that's why we have Laverick Barracks at Townsville, Battle of the Coral Sea, 1942, to protect Australia from the northeast. We are unprotected from the northwest, from refugees in terms of gas and other assets in the northwest. All of that would go to the core of whether you should have faith in Perth for decades to come. Bigger picture, over-the-horizon reasons why you would have faith in Perth. Food, energy, resources, commodities, security, hospitality, tourism, health, education, lifestyle, and an Indian Ocean Command Centre. All of that would give me faith to put money into a project in this place, not for this year and next year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, which is why the American president invested 3 days of his life and calendar to come to a place called Darwin. He wouldn't have even known where it was, I'm sure. Let's take this further and look at, in fact, Perth. Here is the city of Perth. It's the most recent strategic plan. Perth is the city of 2 million people. And in fact, it extends from Yanchep in the north through to Mandurah in the south. It's about 150 kilometres. And 2 million people are stretched out across a canvas, a long, thin canvas of 2 million people. And in fact, that is going to double. It's going to go to 4 million people by the middle of the century, more than double over that time frame. Now, if you were to compare this with Los Angeles, the biggest Western car-based city on Earth, Los Angeles, east to west, is 200 kilometres. So you can take Yanchep 50 kilometres north, Mandurah 50 kilometres to the south, and you've got 20 million people over that canvas. 20 million people deliver an extraordinary amount of tax. You can have a freeway here, you can have a freeway there, you can crisscross the entire metropolitan area with freeways. You've got a canvas of 150 kilometres and you've got 2 million people. You cannot get enough tax out of 2 million people to fund freeways and railways at that extent. So if you're going to double the population, you can't physically extend the city. You've got to densify the city. And so what we will see is another 2 million people plonked almost exactly on top. The great densification of Perth is what we will see. And of course, that's great for efficiencies. You get more usage out of existing infrastructure, like roads and freeways and railway lines and water mains, for example. The existing shopping centres, I know represented here, get a densification in your catchment area, in fact, when you look at it that way. The other thing to say, well, you know, if Perth, by the middle of the century, let's just say there's 4 million people, sort of pretty well crammed into that area, I think we're really going to get maybe 400,000 or 500,000 people north of Joondalup. We're going to get them down into the city every day. What sort of freeway do you need? What sort of motorway do you need? What sort of railway do you need to get that number of people way up there down to there? We have a new railway in Melbourne. It's called the Regional Rail Link. It goes from Werribee on the west into the city centre, into Spencer Street, whatever it's called these days. It's 47 kilometres long. It cost $5,000 million. 5,000 million divided by 47 kilometres is $100 million per kilometre. We have another proposal in Melbourne called the Metro, going from Arden Street in North Melbourne to South Yarra. That's 9 kilometres underground. That is estimated to cost $9 billion. So on top of the ground, a railway costs $100 million a kilometre. Underneath, it costs $1 billion per kilometre. We aren't rich enough to come up with $100 million per kilometre, let alone $1 billion per kilometre. And that is the government's estimate before it's built. There is a story running in today's Fin Review about the Adelaide Hospital. It cost $2.3 billion. When they started it, they said it was going to cost $1.6 billion. Oops, $700 million more. In 1996, I was called into the Major Projects Unit in Victoria, and I've said, we want you to do the demographics of a new project, Bernard. We're calling it Federation Square, and we've got $70 million earmarked for this project. You're going to have it done in 3 years' time. Can you do the demographics? Oh, that's fine. That project was delivered 3 years late. The Auditor General delivered an estimate of the actual cost in 2005. It actually cost $550 million. So when they say this is going to cost $1 billion per kilometre or $100 million per kilometre, you ain't rich enough. There's not enough tax. If you took all your money and left you with nothing to spend, there ain't enough to do that. So how do you take a city from 2 to 4 million people? You densify it. And you think, well, the other way to do it is actually create strong regional centres. Decentralise jobs out of Perth to a Yanchep, to a Rockingham, to a Cannington. Perhaps. Create a strong regional, like a Parramatta, like a Chatswood, like a Box Hill, like a Mount Gravatt, like a Chermside, in fact. Perth does not have that. It's the CBD or it's nothing. As you go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 million people, stronger regional centres will emerge. And these are probably the ones that I'd look at. All of these, good for retail. Retail, entertainment, office, workplace, education, health, would all focus in these regions. Let's take this further. And high altitude demographics might look boring, but it's absolutely fascinating. This chart looks at GDP growth quarter by quarter over 60 years. From, in fact, September 1959 through to December last year. Where you have two negative quarters together, you have a recession. You don't need to know the numbers. I'll read the chart with you. Come with me at a high altitude review of the last 60 years of Australian economic history. So 1959, you had growth, recession, growth, recession, growth, recession, growth, recession, growth, 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 growth. If you had a choice to be a 25-year-old going into the workforce or starting a business for the first time in any year of the last 200 years, what year would you choose? Because I would choose that one, 1993. Because if I was 25 years old in 1993, I was born in 1968, and I would not have known it at the time, I think 30 years of economic prosperity in the future. You have a better chance of succeeding when there ain't no recessions on the horizon. And in fact, if you had started a business in, say, September 1959 as a 25-year-old, whack, straight into recession. Get through that. 35, whack, straight into recession. Get over that. 45, straight into recession. And you start to think, you know, I don't trust credit. I don't want to be in debt. I need to save for a rainy day. And if you're starting a business back here, the sort of people you're selling to remember the Great Depression. They fought in the Second World War. Don't get too ahead of yourself. Be more measured. Plan for a rainy day. Don't spend all you know these people because they are your parents or your parents' parents. Whereas if you were, say, a 15-year-old in 1993, you would have matured to adulthood in an era of unfettered, unmatched prosperity. There is no 30-year stretch of economic history in Australian history unbroken by recession since 1860 to 1890. If you go back over 100 years. And so the people that mature to adulthood, Generation Y, I call them the YOLO generation. You only live once. Why would I save for a rainy day when the future is always better than the past? Extraordinary consumption. So at the end of that period, 25 years later, today, and who knows how long it's going to go on, a suburban home in Canning, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. Mum and Dad both work, in fact. Branded clothing, cafes, bars, restaurants, Bali holidays. And that is just the entry level. That is the standard that we think we're entitled to. You think, well, what is going to happen when there's another recession? Or do we think that we have eradicated the recession virus from the Australian continent? Well, I think there will be a recession. I don't know when it is. I've put this chart up at various conferences around Australia and asked the leading bank economists to tell me when that will be. They won't say. No one wants to know. Let's just say it's 2018 or 20 or 22, 24. At some point it is. What do you think would be the impact on consumer confidence, retail spending confidence, if there was a recession on a people that have never experienced it before? Because I reckon it would freak them out. I think they would panic. We think 6% unemployment is absolutely outrageous. Hang on, 12% there. Interest rates back there were 17%. We think this is normal. This is not normal. It creates an extraordinary sense of entitlement, created a consumer culture that you should be able to see writ large in a place like Canning. But at some point in the future, there is going to be a reset of the priorities. The other point I would make is there's probably, I suspect there is no one in this room that has actually managed anything during a recession. You would have to have been, you have to be well into your 60s to have had a management position in 1992 or 1993. There is no one in government, in state or federal, it's over here, is it? There is no one that has actually, it's certainly in government, in federal government, perhaps in state government, that has actually managed. We have lost that corporate memory. And I think it's worthwhile exercising your minds. What would be the impact on consumer confidence on your business if that happened? Just come with me very briefly back to the 1950s and see how we lived at that time. Here is the 1950s. Here is a suburban home, maybe a typical home in Canning at that time. 3-bedroom brick veneer home on a 1,000 square metre quarter-acre block. 3 bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen. So you came in the front door, in the porch, into the front room, which we call a lounge room, used to be called a parlour, and that's where you entertained. It was a good room. That's where you had your best crockery, you had a sideboard, and you might have a silver tea service in order to showcase the wealth and social standing of this household. Guests were entertained in the good room. Here is how we live today. The house is not 1,000 square metres, it's on 500 square metres. It's 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2 income earners, not 4 kids, 2 kids. Come with me into the house. You come in the entry, right into the bosom of the house. And then off to the side, you have what used to be called a veranda, but which we now call, I don't know if you can see the name of it, al fresco. What is al fresco? We didn't have al fresco back here. The Greeks, the Italians arrived here in the 1950s and 1960s. What the hell are you Australians doing living in an English house? You have a Mediterranean climate, indoor, outdoor living. And of course, we also embraced their diet, out with tea, in with coffee, in with arugula, olive oil, pasta. All of a sudden, we started to embrace Asian influences. Who had heard of bok choy in the 1990s? Or who, in the last 5 years, who knew 5 years ago what quinoa was? Who knew how to pronounce quinoa? Who knows how to spell quinoa? It's actually an Arabic grain. Dhaka is another one. You can see these Mediterranean influences, indoor, outdoor. And if this is the new good room, the kitchen dining room, then I would want to showcase the wealth and prosperity of the household. I would want an island bench, and I would want a marble bench top, waterfall perhaps, Calcutta marble, and then rising out of the centre of that would be the new silverware, which is tapware with a gooseneck tap. And you are showcasing the wealth and prosperity of this household. This is my living style. And you would prepare a bok choy in quinoa and dukkha. Out on the thing, you would have a 6-burner barbecue with a wok burner. This is the Mediterraneanisation and the migrant influences on Australian consumer culture. That's how we live today. I wanted to talk about retail spending. Let's just imagine you go back to 2005 and say, well, over 2005, February 2005, 2006 through to 2016, it's 10 years. What retail spending trends can you determine over that time frame? And over 10 years to February 2016, retail spending in Australia has increased by, let's call it 60%. So retail stores' turnover increased by 60% over 10 years. But liquor store turnovers increased by 91%. Pharmacy increased by 90%. Stand back from this, high altitude. What are the Australian people trying to tell you through this chart by their millions of small purchases over 10 years? Clearly it is drink and drugs that is driving our preferences. But again, stand back from this, don't get bogged down in the small numbers. This is lifestyle, liquor, pharmacy, cafes, restaurants, supermarket, food. Where was it just hard to make a living in the last 10 years ago? What is the worst shop you could have bought in February 2006? I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how hard you work. This is the brutal aspect of business. You can be the smartest person in the room. You can work 24/7. You can work 7 days a week for 10 years. If you're in the wrong space at the wrong time in history, you're pushing uphill. Why not get where the current is growing? Get behind a liquor store, pharmacy store, cafes. Think, well, you know, if pharmacy stores are growing so much and I'm running a supermarket, why don't we nick pharmacy lines and stick them in the supermarket? Why don't we take a barista cafe and stick it in a supermarket? You can actually see the logic by which this is emerging. When was the last time you saw a Generation Y actually buy a newspaper? This is a consumer disruptive shift that has changed Australia. That's 10 years. What about the last 5 years? Over the last 5 years might be a bit different. There we go, 25%. Well, actually, the real damage was done 5 years ago. Get into a newsagent in 2006, get the hell out of it in 2010. You probably could have got away with that because the digital disruption has come to effect in the last 5 years. I reckon this would freak me out if I was a retailer. What is the digital disruption sitting just around the corner that can change the business model? What about over the last 12 months? 7%. There's a bit of a revival here around hardware, particularly Bunnings and so forth, but the losers are still the losers. 5, 10, 1 year, the winners are still the winners. The Australian people are talking to you through this chart. They're telling you about their preferences, what engages them, what disengages them. Let's take this further and look at where the jobs are. Who has the capacity to buy stuff from my business in Canning? Because of all of the collapse of the mining boom, no one's got any money. Actually, that's not quite correct. Well, you can make a statement. In the 21st century, the Australian economy has added 3.5 million jobs. From February 2000 to February 2016, this nation's workforce increased from 8 million to 11 million. So we've created 3.5 million jobs. You know, we've lost 359,000 jobs in mining, in Perth. Alcoa in Geelong closed, 1,000 jobs disappeared overnight. Ford, Holden, Toyota, all have lost jobs over that time, plus the mining boom. But the point is this, for every job that is lost, it is a fact that we create 10 elsewhere. And you're focused on the death and destruction of one job. But there are 10 jobs that are growing. I know, in my business, I'm going to reorientate my business to the happy end, where people are confident, where jobs are expanding, where people have confidence in the future, where people will max out their credit card and build up debt because they are so confident about the future. What sectors would they be? Well, that'd be healthcare. Is that 700,000 jobs? There's only 3.1 mil, 700,000, was it about 20%? 1 job in 5 has been added in healthcare, and then professional services, and then construction. At the other end of the chart, there's manufacturing and agriculture, there's mining. Hang on, that's about 150,000 extra jobs. The mining sector is physically bigger now than it was 15, 16 years ago. Never look at the numbers. The numbers are boring in demographics. What is the story? What are the Australian people trying to tell you through this chart? These are knowledge workers. In order to participate in the prosperity of modern Australia, you need either a university degree or technical training. At the other end of the chart, this is unskilled, low-skilled, barely skilled people who are no longer required because those jobs have now been outsourced to Guangzhou. I actually think that what this sets up is a have and have not economy. You say, well, actually, do these people sit at home watching daytime television and feel resentment at not being able to participate in the prosperity of modern Australia? Does that lead to, certainly them and us, radicalisation, perhaps? I want an Australia, I want a Perth, I want a Canning, where everyone believes they have a chance at prosperity. Upskilling, reskilling, relocating, volunteering, engagement programs in order to bring everyone into prosperity going forward. And I suppose from this point, you know, if Cannington is to be a suburban regional centre with retail and health and education, that's the way you would actually build this and future-proof the community, in fact, going forward. Another point that I would make is that often this is not the technical skills, but the soft skills you require. If you look at the way in which digital disruption has already worked its way through the workforce, you have a number of examples. You know, the argument is that automation is going to take everyone's job and manufacturing is going to disappear. Well, the self-service petrol petrol pump attendants have found new jobs. ATMs and NetBank versus the tellers, bank tellers have lost their job in the last generation. Film processing, photographic film processing, I think you have to explain what that job actually is to a Gen Y. At the 2001 census, there were 5,000 people involved in the film processing business in Australia. That job does not exist today. Those 5,000 people aren't unemployed, they found other things to do. Just as with all of these have created opportunities or requirements for people to actually fit into other jobs. The best thing you can do for your kids is to make sure they get either a university education or some sort of technical training. We can't future-proof your job, but we can future-proof your skills. And if you are fluid, flexible, mobile, agile, articulate, then you will find a job no matter how the economy shifts. My job as a truck driver has disappeared because of automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles. But if you introduce yourself to these people over there, there is a job going on a mine site. No, I'm a truck driver. I will wait until a truck driver job comes along. And besides that, I don't know those people. But if you have self-confidence, if you are articulate, if you make friends easily, if you can see fluidity, then you will take your skill set from the truck driving industry and reposition it in the mining industry. If you've lost your job in the mining industry, how can you actually reposition that elsewhere into the economy? It is the fluidity, flexibility, soft skills, fit-in ability that will future-proof your career. And you do not learn soft skills at university. I think you learn it at home from mum and dad in primary school in terms of being able to fit in. And just finally, some key points. I would say that Australia talks the talk on innovation. We've yet to actually prove it. And I would love to see something like an initiative coming out of Canning, which is a festival of entrepreneurship, where you focus not on the Test cricket captain that you've provided or the netball team person that came from Canning 30 years ago. Let go of that and focus on a 28-year-old who's created a business, employed apprentices, pays their tax, and is a good example of entrepreneurship at the local level. Knowledge work, global connectivity, reshaping Australian business and cities of the future. We're a young, vital country with resources and good prospects for the future. There is no reason why you would not invest in Australia, in Perth and in Canning going forward. Just finally, I want to introduce you to some new research that I've done specifically on the City of Canning. I've scanned the City of Canning metropolitan area, looking at every suburb, every neighbourhood, every precinct across the municipality area in order to find the City of Canning's bachelor hotspot. Where is the highest concentration of eligible young bachelors in the City of Canning? And by young, I mean 25 to 34, 5 years either side of prime marriageable age, and single, separated, widowed, never married or divorced. These boys are on the market. Where is the suburb in Canning with the highest concentration of eligible young men relative to eligible young women? Yes, you can do this analysis from the census. The highest concentration of eligible young bachelors in Canning is to be found in the suburb of Cannington. In fact, technically 1.68 eligible young bachelors per eligible young female. Clearly the Cannington pub on a Friday night is the place to be. I have in fact done this for every major city in Australia, including my hometown of Melbourne, and the bachelor hotspot in Melbourne is in a suburb known as West Footscray, and I have been told that the odds might be good, but the goods are odd in... I would never say that about Cannington. Actually, I did this in New Zealand once, and it was actually a prison, so I'm assuming there's no... I'm assuming there is no prison in Cannington. You can do exactly the same analysis for eligible young women in Canning, and I've run the numbers. The highest concentration is to be found in the suburb of Canning Vale. In fact, it's still less than 1 to 1, 0.82 eligible young women per eligible young male is the female hotspot. Canning Vale is separated from Cannington by the Canning River, which I think should be renamed the River of Love, bringing together the boys of Cannington with the girls of Canning Vale. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, we promised you edgy. We promised you a bit of laughter. I think we got that in spades. So perhaps if I could try and summarise that. What's Canning going to be? We're going to have an entrepreneurs workshop. We're going to densify. We're going to build big houses on smaller blocks, and we're going to sit and wait and perhaps engineer a small recession. Having said that, we do have a bit of time now for questions from the floor, and I'm sure that Bernard's inspired some of those. So we've got a roving mic. Just put your hand up. We've got one at the back. We'll bring the microphone to you.
Any thoughts? Yes. Just call it out and I'll repeat it if you like.
Thank you. Probably don't know one. Question for you, Bernard, having studied social demographics at university, one of the rare ones 20 years ago, how much more influential is the field now in today's businesses and government than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago? Is the skill set which you're presenting today rising in society in terms of its value?
Yeah, look, I think it is. I think we're almost obsessed with demographics in Australia. There's only 20 million people, 24 million people across the Australian continent. If you're in the business of allocating funds for infrastructure or private investment for a piece of infrastructure in like a shopping centre, for example, you need to get the demographics right. In China, yep, that'll do. There's always enough people. Even in North America, there's always enough people. But in thinly populated Australia, you need a rifle shot to make sure you get exactly the right number of people to fund that piece of infrastructure. There was some talk about 18 months ago that the census was going to be removed from Australia, And myself and a number of other people in this field wrote a letter to the paper saying that we, of any nation on earth, need to make sure we get it right, because we've got such a big continent to cover with such a small tax base, we can't get it wrong, and we need the figures to be right. And for that reason, I think demographics is absolutely critical. It's very hard to find any business that is not fundamentally underpinned by it. Certainly government administration, anyone that's pushing around large amounts of money, let alone your own money, your asset, your business, you want to make sure that there's enough people with the right spending capacity in the area to make it worthwhile. And it's also fun, you know. I think that's also an element of this area. Yes, call it out.
Yeah, hi, I'm Wendy, Wendy Jeffrey from Jalma Iron. I'm really interested in what you say about innovation and creating that culture, but I guess what I see is it's all very well to have these seminars and get people together and celebrate, but how do you actually enable them, give them the resources to enable them to get from point A to these billion-dollar companies? And that's, I see, the biggest problem.
Well, I actually think that it comes down to, I mean, I think we have an entire generation, Generation Y, that is footloose, that's fancy-free. They're not committed to marriage, mortgage, children or career until their late 20s, early 30s. They're all educated, they've all well-travelled, they all have digital computer skills. If there is any generation in history that should be entrepreneurial, it is Gen Y. Speak to any Gen Y in our organisation or yours, they say, yeah, I quite working for, is it an iron business, whatever it is, or KPMG, but what I really want to do is be involved in a startup. They all want to be involved in startups. They're all inherently entrepreneurial, I think. And it's a question of how you can tap that, harness that. As an organisation, what we do is we have a festival of creative thinking once a year. And we've got 6,000 people across Australia, about 4,000 of them are under 30. They've all got fantastic ideas. So feed in your ideas into this program, and the winner gets a 2-week holiday to the New York office or something like that. And they love it. And stuff that has come out of this were the 0.5% of 0.5%ers that make a difference. And that kid feels, everyone feels engaged, they feel worthwhile, they feel bound into the organisation. And you can say, well, this organisation actually supports creative thought and innovation. And then there's the Festival of Creative Thinking of Entrepreneurship that the City of Canning is going to launch, I hope, or something similar, where for 6 weeks of the year, the local newspaper showcases on page 3 the candidate for this year's Festival Enterprise winner. And this week it might be a 28-year-old brickie who has 3 labourers, started a business, works damn hard, plays at the local footy club. You know, I would find that more admirable than knowing that 25 years ago some test cricketer used to live here. It's showcasing to a 16, you know, I can do that. I can do that. Well, look, I suppose the economic development people, there's any number of government support agencies or whatever to actually incubate ideas, I suppose. I'm more interested in harvesting from the community a mindset shift, rather than to sit back and say, you know, watching daytime thinking, yeah, those rich bastards, you know, or to actually engage people so that they feel included, that they can actually make a contribution, that their ideas are valued. Okay, 1 in 100 might work, 99 won't work. But I think it's the process that actually shifts community opinion around entrepreneurship. Whatever the Americans are doing, it's working. Yes, there's a lot to not be admiring about America, but don't be blind about this. There's one aspect where they lead the planet and have for a generation or two. We can learn just 1 or 2 things from that and incorporate it into the Australian culture. Yes.
Thank you very much. Love the ideas around innovation there, and I'm Councillor Tarrant here at the City of Canning. My question for you is a little bit in the digital disruption space. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how local government might be impacted by digital disruption.
Well, I think digital disruption will in fact have a significant impact on a number of businesses, and digital disruption might be in terms of payment systems, accounts receivable, accounts payable, all that to be automated eventually. So all the payment, I don't know how many people are employed by the City of Canning, hundreds, thousands, whatever it is. But the sort of jobs that are going to be replaced by automation and artificial intelligence are sort of dull, boring, repetitive jobs, really. I actually say, well, actually all of those jobs need to be protected. What are those people going to do? That's a negative view of the future. I say, thank God for that. Humanity should not be doing dull, boring, repetitive stuff. It frees humanity from repetition and frees you up to do something creative. I don't know what. I mean, I don't know what those 5,000 film processing workers are doing. There were 17,000 people unemployed as a consequence of the collapse of Ansett. Now, admittedly, it makes a difference when the digital disruption impacts when an economy is rising as opposed to falling. But you only have to look at that chart, 10 to 1. There are jobs blossoming, burgeoning around health, education, professional services. That, to me, is where we need to and have a positive view, rather than in a Luddite way be fearful of automation and artificial intelligence. Welcome it, embrace it, and encourage people to think more broadly. Yes, I used to be a truck driver up in the mines, but now I'm a, Uber driver, for example. I don't know. I have faith in human ingenuity and creativity, that we will find other opportunities. Yes, just call it out.
Any idea when this economic cool down is going to
Change? Okay. If you look at, I actually think that this could well be an issue for Perth for the balance of the decade. So it's 2016. It's not going to bounce back next year. I can't see anything like that. But it could scoop out and slowly recover 2017, 18, 19. That's the best scenario, I think. Yeah. Perth has been hit harder from a demographic point of view. Although I will say that I think Brisbane is particularly hard hit as well. I think there's every possibility that the Queensland, for the first time ever in probably since the Second World War, is going to have more locals leave the state than Australians arrive into the state. So I think Queensland is also going to be strong. That is partly offset by the low dollar, high levels of international tourism, perhaps. The sort of things that I'd love to see in Western Australia is greater commitment to military spending, Australia and America. Transportation logistics, I think that would certainly work well in Canning. And then that small business entrepreneurship that is probably embodied in this room. How can we cultivate, instead of working in isolation, actually work as a team? I used to play basketball as a kid. There's a point in the basketball match where you get 2 free throws. You stand at the line, you have a first one, invariably you miss it. And your 4 other teammates come along and pat you on the back. Don't worry, you'll get it next time. It's, I believe in you. Imagine if we could have a business culture in Canning like that. You know, not every idea is a good idea. Some ideas are bloody awful. But what have you learnt from it? And here are all these business mentors. No worries, mate, we'll get it next time. What have you learned from it? Rather than have a go, fall flat in your face and no one helps you. That is something that the community, the business community and the council can actually foster. The council can't say, that's a good business over there, go and do it. But the council can provide the framework. In the same way that, like at KPMG, we don't know what those ideas that 22-year-olds come up with, but we can provide the framework. Here is a festival of creative thinking. What's your idea to make this business work better? And you get a 23-year-old saying, you people up there have no idea. If you move the photocopier from there to there, it would save this amount of time per day. That's the sort of thinking you want to harvest by creating the right environment. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
one of the big differences, I guess, between now and in '93 when we had the last big recession, I guess, is the big pool of superannuation funds and the fact that they're seeking a place to put their money. So I'm curious as to your comment in terms of that pool of money and the impact on potential recessions and places to park that money.
Well, that pool of money is looking mighty tempting in terms of taxation at the moment. But I would love to see a greater investment in infrastructure in Australian cities. But I think we need to get the pricing right. $100 million per kilometre for a railway on top of the ground is outrageous. Now, it's great for some people, the contractors, but it's unsustainable. If you're going to charge that, we can do this amount per decade or so as a people. We need to fix the pricing of infrastructure, but not infrastructure that makes us feel good, you know, like a new footy stadium. We got a new footy? No, oh God, right. But something that will deliver productivity, like a railway. A good example of this is the Alice Springs to Darwin railway line. Was it the Garn? Completed just after 2001. It cost $1 billion. You know, in hindsight, I reckon we should have taken that $1 billion and doubled the coal handling facilities at about 5 ports from Newcastle up to Hay Point. And when the boom came, we could have harvested more tax at that particular time. So having prioritised return on investment infrastructure and also making sure we get the pricing right is what we need to do, I think. Yep.
Are we living beyond our means, beyond our income as a country?
Are we living beyond our means as a country? Well, the fact that we have more debt.
So many big building, big projects being built offshore and shipped in, and rather than built on site. How much a labourer gets paid in Australia, and how far we've taken the lollipop net, or the traffic wardens, whatever you want to call it, that look after, protect the roads, that whenever anything happens, we're over-governed, over-regulated. How do we compare to the rest of the world?
In actual fact, our level of indebtedness is about 20% of GDP. The UK is about 70%. The US is about 80%. Japan is about 190%. We're actually quite good compared to the rest of the world, but we're not as strong as we were in 2007, 2008. We are living beyond our means, and in actual fact, you can continue on that trajectory for a while, you know, maybe for another 10 years. There comes a point down the track where you've got to pay it back. I mean, I think everyone intuitively knows that you can't keep sticking stuff on your credit card and not have it come back and bite you on the backside eventually. And I suppose the logic would be, well, you know, if I'm 55 years old, then I don't actually have to pay it back. I get my super payout, whatever. I don't think that's the right way. I think we as a nation need to have a very honest discussion about our situation, where we want to be, and about taking responsibility. And that certainly means paying our way and making sensible choices. Look, the reality is that you can ignore it in the short term. Just as you can put to one side the credit card statement, you can get away with it, and ultimately has to be resolved. But in terms of international competitiveness, we're actually not too bad. And I think that is because we were in such a strong position 10 years ago, just before the GFC.
Bernard, we might call it a halt at this particular point. There's going to be an opportunity to talk with Bernard in a few minutes over a cool drink. Can you just join me, please, in thanking Bernard?